Okay, so can everyone see the screen? That's amazing. Sorry, okay. Let me focus real quick. All right, so today we are going to be discussing some theoretical perspectives on human sexuality, as you can see by the slide here. Then I'm going to post these slides and also a slide set I made that talks a lot about, or primarily focuses on the, sort of the historical aspects of it. The history we do talk about is going to be, I'm pretty sure it's next week's lecture, when we actually talk about the historical researchers. So a lot of the founders of the research that we do today. Okay. I've also posted the slides from last week. Anybody's interested in those? I'll wait till you guys are done. For everyone sharing a phone number right now, you do know this is a public domain. So everyone can see phone numbers. Okay, so everyone has everyone's phone numbers. I'll continue when everyone's ready. Word. So on Blackboard, I also posted the slides from last week. I also posted the assignment. There are going to be weekly journal entries. They are private, so I am the only one that is able to see them. They are not supposed to be super long. They are really thought responses, so I'm going to pose a question to everyone, and then I just really want to hear your take on the question at hand and how it may or may not relate to your own life, or if it's relevant, or things like that. But the questions are supposed to provoke some sort of critical thought. It also will help understand a lot of the topics that we do discuss in the class. So those are due weekly. So I post them on Monday. So it's already posted now. It's under the weekly assignments or weekly assignments tab on Blackboard, and they are due on Friday. I think I set it to close at 11:30 at night. So it's plenty of time, and they are weekly. So you'll get one every week. Any questions about that? All the questions I just answered. So the due date is on Friday. The format is informal. They're just your responses. So I ask a question, you think about it, you write it up. That's really about it. If you want, I mean, this is like, I'm a stickler for grammar and spelling. So if you want to write it in a Word doc and copy and paste it into the journal, that's totally fine. And everyone saw it doesn't have to be double spaced. This is very informal, but it's, I would suggest putting a little bit of thought into it. They're weekly, 1 to 2 pages max. There are a lot of you, so I don't want to spend all my week reading, but I do anyways. Yes. So the prompt is up. Okay. So moving forward, any other things? Anything else quickly? No? Great. What do you mean by? So, okay, so for something, the sexuality I'm talking about, sexuality is more about who we are as people than what we do. It's not always behaviors, but it's a lot of our thoughts. So it encompasses a lot of things. So our entire being, a lot of our physical actions, our emotional responses, spiritual responses, thoughts, feelings, everything that relates to how we are as sexual human being. We are here, and it's talking about how our behaviors are. So how have outside factors influenced a lot of who we are? Okay. Does that clarify? Or I can go. Oh, okay, perfect. Awesome. So moving forward, so before we start getting into theories, which are super fun, we are going to start talking about some terminology. So the first thing is the biggest defining differences are sex and gender. So sex is not gender. So our sex refers to our biological constructs. So this is our genetic, our XY, XX, and then we're going to get into variants of hormonal chromosomal makeups of that later in the semester. But when we say sex, we're referring to someone's biology. Gender is social and psychological, so it's a social construction It is based on norms and behaviors that are associated with one's sex, biological sex. So male, female, transgender, masculinity, femininity, mask, femme, butch, all those things. Those are all ideas that revolve around the notion of gender. So, if you see someone doing something opposing to the gender, we often will look at that as a negative more than a positive as it should be. So quickly, just remember when you talk about someone's sex, you're talking about someone's biological aspects. When you're talking about someone's gender, you're talking about a social, psychological construction. Yes. So the next one is, these are big differences. I don't know why these are coming up so much. It's weird. Anyway, so when we talk about one's sexual identity, that is a label that is used to describe someone's orientation. Heterosexual is a sexual identity. Gay is a sexual identity. Homosexual is an identity. We're talking about someone's orientation. Sexual attraction is different than sexual identity. So sexual attraction is what and who you desire to engage in sexual activities with. It's not the actual behavior, but it is who you are attracted to. So a lot of individuals will think just because you are gay or lesbian or whomever in between, you are only allowed to be attracted to those of the same gender identity or sexual or biological sex. But that's not true. Like, a lot of gay men are attracted to women, and a lot of women are attracted to men and women and everyone in between. So it's not always defined as being associated with one's sexual identity. It simply means someone who you desire to engage in sexual behaviors with, but you're not engaging in it. Sexual behavior, however, is the actual behavior. So this is any behavior that produces arousal and increases the chance of orgasm. So masturbation is considered a sexual behavior. Oral sex, sexual behavior. Penetrative sex is sexual behavior. Anything that increases one's chance of reaching an orgasm is considered sexual behavior. And that is all sexual attraction lead to sexual behavior? No. So that's very important to understand, is that there is a difference. So like sexual orientation is not always about sex, because there are individuals that identify as asexual, which is also a sexual identity. And there is no involvement with sex in there as well. So just because one's orientation is X, it doesn't mean that it's going to equal Y. There's a lot of variation involved with that. Does that all make sense? Word. Are these all things that we have all heard before? I'm just repeating. Amazing. Someone should have just told me to stop talking. All right, so now on to the super duper fun stuff of theories. So, theoretical perspectives. So when we think about what drives us, what is a motivating factor to push us forward? What is, sort of fire that lights under our asses and moves us? What are the things that actually stop us? So what are the facilitators of something happening? What are the barriers of something happening? What are the motivators of something happening? What are, the down regulators? So there's a lot involved. So one thing is psychological influences. The biggest thing is we have to think about our mood state, and mood and emotions are different. So mood is more of a large, broad state, like low arousal, high arousal. Emotions can often be much quicker. There could also be more trait-like, which I'm going to get into the difference between state and trait. I could just do that. So a state is based on situation. So I feel like crap. Why? Because I'm talking with somebody that I don't really want to talk to. So I'm in a bad mood because of this situation. However, if I remove myself from that situation, I'll probably feel much better. A trait is consistent across multiple different occasions and times. So if you are a person with depression, that's going to be a trait. Sadness can be a state. So when we think about our mood states, it's what are we feeling at that time? Are we feeling motivated to get out and go do something? Are we feeling comfortable sitting on a couch and not doing it and watching Netflix and, being in a more isolated state? Our cognitive alertness, how much are we focusing on something? What are we looking at? What are we thinking about? How quick are we thinking about something? And then our attitudes towards sex and relationships. If we have negative attitudes towards sex and relationships, we're more likely to be more reserved. We're less likely to go forward towards something. If you have a positive aspect on these things, then you're more likely to move forward. However, again, a lot of that is built on histories and past experiences, and also learning from families and things like that. A lot of cultural aspects are involved with that as well. Which brings us into the next thing is cultural societal influences. So what are our cultural norms? Sometimes, we have some cultures and religious beliefs where, people have to wait and they feel more comfortable with that, and others don't. And, that could drive us as well. If we have the belief where one has to wait to have sex before, one has to wait for marriage to have sex, then you're less likely to feel motivated to engage in sexual behaviors, but maybe not a relationship. You might be more motivated for that. A lot of, with our religious beliefs, things that come from that. Also, certain religious beliefs are anti-masturbation. There's a lot of wives' tales about that too. In Judaism, it's a lot of negativity towards it. They call it, like spilling the seed, because sex in a lot of religious, in the eyes of religion, is meant for reproduction only, not a lot for pleasure, which is kind of sad. Media also, what are we seeing? The media has really influenced a lot of how we look at relationships and how we understand relationships, and also how we understand sex and sexual behaviors. I get onto a pedestal all the time about this because I can't stand how TV shows and some movies depict sex. It is so frustrating. Like, one thing that always gets me is there never seems to be a lot of conversation about condoms or conversation about lubrication, or my biggest pet peeve is conversations around consent. And then the worst part is that they are just sliding right in so quickly. Like, there's no foreplay. There's no talking about what they want, and it's always the man guiding the woman. And then it's always like after prom or homecoming or like a house party or the parents are away. So as you can hear, I'm like totally against all of that. But I also have my own views on like the negativity that porn has done to the community, but I have a whole lecture on porn later. And there's never really talk about sex. It's always like an awkward moment after sex. Like they're ashamed about it, but yet they still did it. So anyway, I don't know. That's my thing. So I think one of the bigger things is a lot of societal influences, because that can also impact our mood. And then we think about biological and evolutionary influences. So our biological makeup, hormone levels have a lot to do with motivation, internal motivation. Low levels of testosterone and estrogen, progesterone is going to decrease our willingness to engage in sex. High levels can increase greater levels of aggression. That's one thing. Our gender role behaviors can influence that as well. How we are thinking of an evolutionary perspective is that men are supposed to have more casual sexual partners. Women are more about finding the husband and getting kids. And thinking, I hate the word mate selection, but it's an evolutionary term of like what we're supposed to look at and what we're not supposed to look at. So all that stuff. There's one of the biggest things when we talk about relationships is that you actually read a lot of stuff on evolutionary psychology, and it's not always the most interesting, but it kind of some of it does make sense, because you have to give them a nod, because it is a field of psychology, and I will have to give them a nod. But at the same time, it's a little dated, and I don't really appreciate a lot of the things that they say, just due to a lot of gender biases. There has been a big debate on Twitter about whether or not men kiss the people they are intimate with. Oh my god. Wait, who started that debate on Twitter? What is going on? Yes, men are less likely, men, but we are also less likely to engage in more socially intimate behaviors compared to women, mainly because the perception of others while seeing that is that he is less masculine. Socially intimate PDA. So less that, because if we see some guy like getting and cuddling next and nuzzling against a female, or a lot of this, I'm going to speak in the heterosexual world for a minute, is because we're going to perceive that man as being less masculine. Yes. Oh yeah, go ahead. If you guys have anything to say, just raise your hand and just go ahead.
Okay, so basically what I wanted to say was that I feel like men just don't show like proper, no, I don't want to say proper, but like they're scared to show any kind of like emotion towards each other than something that like resembles toxic masculinity. Because like I feel like even at a young age, when boys like try to hold hands, they try to hug each other, people are just like, oh, why are you doing that? Like they just get, I don't want to say discouraged from showing each other that kind of behavior, but if they do show that kind of behavior to each other, they just kind of get shut down. And I think
I would say discouraged is the right word. I would agree with you on that. I think that discouraged is the right word.
Oh, okay.
This is culturally subjective. I mean, growing up, I was like, a lot of my family was like, if I came from a family that wasn't very intimate with each other, and by intimate, I don't mean like we were having sex with our family members, because no, that's illegal. But hugging each other, telling each other we love each other, like all that stuff, it is a thing that I was never taught. So it depends on the family that you do grow up in and around, and also your surroundings as well. But yeah, no, a lot of young boys were shown to be like, okay, like don't hug other people, because then it's like, oh my God, but then they make the joke when they hug and whatever, tell each other they love them, and they're like, oh, no homo afterwards. And I was like, eh. But if you want to hug a friend, hug a friend. But I just want to let everyone know, like, that is one of the social aspects of it. But yeah, so I really appreciate what we had to say. But we're going to get all into this. And we're also going to get into personality types as well. I'm not a big personality person, so we'll get into it. Okay, so with personality stuff. So the first one we're going to talk about is psychological traits, because in my head, they're the most fascinating, and then social. So both stable psychological traits and moment-to-moment states can affect our sexual behavior. So you got to think of personality. The big five. Has anybody taken a personality psych class yet? Oh, okay. There's so many. The Myers-Briggs is like a personality profile. Yes, Ocean. The big five. So the thing, yeah, all lecture slides will be posted, but I just don't record them. So if anybody was like really interested with personality, I'm so sorry. I'm just not like a big personality person because I hate trying to put people into 5 different boxes. But the personality traits have been linked in research to our sexuality, and think of it being more introverted is more likely to stay inside and less social interaction. So that'll again reduce your opportunities for sexual activities and behaviors and relationships potentially, unless you find someone who's also introverted. That's great. And then also extroversion, you might increase your chances or abilities to engage in some sort of sexual or romantic moments with people. And then we think of learned associations of this was good, so I'll do this again. But this was good in this moment, or this was bad in this moment. So that's really important to think about is learned associations, is that we learn through a lot of our histories and we learn through a lot of our experiences that impact the way we again engage with others. And others might not be, it doesn't always have to be the specific person, because like, oh my God, I had a horrible relationship dating this guy. But then you'll start to know the people that look like the ex you actually don't want to approach because that person reminds you of them. So erotophilia is a personality trait which assesses an individual's disposition to approach or respond to sexual cues, either positive or negative. And then attitudes. How do we think? How do we feel about certain things? It could be a permanent trait attitude. It could be a state attitude. I don't like this person. I have a negative attitude towards this moment because I'm in a bad mood. I'm in a really good mood at this time, so I have a strong attitude about certain things. Not all of these have, the reason why I like to talk about these in the broad is because they don't always have to relate to one's sexual being or sexuality. It could really involve any sort of aspect that's going on. And then mood states, again, I talked about distraction. We've all been talking to people, like I could say this very comfortably, and you don't have to answer, but how many people have been on a date with somebody and that person was just going on and on and on about something and you had no idea what they were saying because you were just so distracted with everything that was going on in your head. There was something happening to you earlier that day, you literally couldn't focus on what they said, and they're like, you agree, right? And half the time you're just like, you're going to say yes because you don't know what they said, but you don't want to say no because you don't really know. So we usually agree to things that we don't really know about, which is a bad thing. But I find I'm such a distracted person 24/7. My boyfriend knows this as well. As like, he'll be talking to me and he'll be like, "You get that, right?" Or like, "So what time?" And I'm like, "For what? Like, where are we going? What's happening?" He goes, I just gave you what we're doing." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, great." So distraction is a big thing. And we're going to talk about distraction as well as how it impacts a lot of relationships as well, like romantic relationships. But you also have to think that this is a bi-directional thing. It's not just one person doing it to the other, it's a person doing it to you as well. So you might think that someone is not really into you, but they could be, they are just distracted at that moment. But we are going to assume that or attribute their negativity towards us as us, when we don't really know that it could be them as well. So that is a big thing as well. We don't always know what is going on with others because we're just so quick to judge what we're seeing outright or assume something is going on with that person outright without us really asking them what's going on. So that is a thing as well. So that's a bi-directional. So, all right, Nicholas, good question. So it's easier for us to assume that it's us and actually ask a person what is going on because most of us don't really know how to approach a situation when someone is being very open about certain things. And for us, we also might not think that they're going to be comfortable talking about it. So with all the processes going through our head, like, what if they say something, I'm not going to know how to address it. What if they don't want to talk about it? It's going to be me again. They just don't want to talk to me about it. Or what if they just don't like me and they're just being nice and telling me it's something else, but it really could be me. So we have a hard time with that understanding. And we're all at fault. I'm totally at fault for this too. But it's one where we have to understand that sometimes it's not us, sometimes it is. But my biggest plug with this is if you do believe that there might be something else, it might not be you, and if the person looks like they're having a moment, it's okay to ask them and be like, if you're comfortable with talking about it, like I'm here if you want to discuss it. If not, I totally get it, but those sort of things. Also depends on the situation you're in. Like if you're out at a bar with your date and they don't look like they're happy, you're not going to want to do like a 45-minute therapy session while at happy hour or at dinner. So that'll be a weird moment. Yes. Ashley, that was the first question that I ask all my dates. So tell me about your childhood traumas. Tell me about that weird family. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is like all cultures and societies pretty much regulate our sexual behaviors. We have all placed, and by we, I'm talking about cultures and societies, have all really placed this idea of what normalcy is and what deviant is. So we have to think about how we actually see somebody's behaviors and understand that that person is a person, but you have no idea, part of my friends right now, but you have no idea what the fuck they're coming from. You don't know their culture probably. You don't know their history, past background. You don't know what their family is like right away. But automatically we are quick to think that something is wrong because they're going to think it's bad or deviant and whatever. Like homosexual, I hate saying homosexuality, but same-sex relationships have been considered deviant. It goes against the normal life, and that was based off a lot of cultures and religions. Sex before marriage would be considered deviant behavior. Masturbation is sometimes considered deviant behavior. So we have to think of all these factors that influence sexual behavior, like religion, the contrast to permissiveness of like ancient Greeks and Romans, which were much more fluid and open, to the early Christians, which were much more rigid. Science we'll get into later, but also thinking about popular media, how we see media, the exposure through media. You know, it depends on what you follow. The media, or if you Google a lot of things, or Instagram, whatever, all those social media things, they're all remembering what you're doing. So they're all going to put you in this little path of everything that you like and look at. We're just going to keep showing you because this is what you keep looking at. So it creates a lot of confirmation bias without being able to expand your knowledge to other things as well. Also, yeah, TV has become really sexually explicit. The other day I was watching, what was it, like one of those like Love at First Sight or Married at the Altar, like 90-day fiancés or whatever that stuff is. And I was watching, I was like, this is why people think Americans are just idiots. And yet everyone looks at us like we're all prude people, but we have the most insane television of people getting married for money, and we forget that marriage is also a thing that you could choose not to do, and it's not always about money, but all that. Ugh. Oh my god, Love is Blind. Jessica was the worst human being on the planet. I'm so over it. She's 2020. She is totally 2020. Okay, so going into some biological factors. So we're, again, like I talked about before, some early things like biological factors like genetics and hormones. Some studies have shown that there are genetic components for homosexuality or same-sex attraction and same-sex sexual behaviors. Some hormones or studies have shown that there's differences in the composition of brains and brain matter, things like that. Also prenatal hormones. We're gonna talk more about the evolutionary factors in a little bit, so I'm just gonna skip over that for time. Okay, so these are the theories that we're going to be talking about. Hopefully some of them will be familiar, especially if you had to take Psych 101, but I'm not sure if they go over all of these. Okay, so psychoanalytic theory. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not a big fan of psychoanalytic theory, but again, that's just me. If you are, happy for you. But one of the biggest people in the world of psychoanalytic theory was Sigmund Freud. He, really focused on this idea that our libido is what drives our sex. So primary sex drives. He found that individuals with low libido were less motivated to engage in sexual behaviors compared to those with a higher libido. Yeah. His personality structure of the id, ego, and superego makes sense. So the id is pretty much our most basic part of our personality, which contains our libido. The id operates according to the pleasure principle. I call it the Janet Jackson principle. So meaning it seeks to obtain gratification and fulfillment of its needs. Immediate needs, like I want this now. Like really, not thinking about anything else or anyone else, but just I need immediate gratification. I need to satisfy my needs. The ego exists to keep to regulate the id. So this operates on the reality principle. So what it does, it just looks at you think, all right, so I really want to have sex right now. The id is going to be like, or the ego is going to be like, you really can't do that right now, because you're doing a lot of other things. The time is not right. You're in the middle of a lecture. Just don't leave and go have sex randomly with all these people, or go on a date, or go do something. Like you need to stay here. So it's a lot of it is built on our rationality, our logistics, also thinking about self-destruction. Like if you do this, you know you will hurt somebody or yourself, or da, 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 da. The superego is what he thinks of as at our conscious level. So the superego tries to persuade the ego to not do what is realistic, but what is moral. Like, you should not do this because it is actually a bad thing. It's based on our morals, which are built up by our culture and our our surroundings, our social surroundings. Our conscious and unconscious mind. So he believed that we have that iceberg thing where a lot of our thoughts and beliefs and behaviors live in our unconscious, and we do a lot of things without thinking about it. Our conscious is when we actually think about behaviors that we're doing. So think before act. That is specifically talking to your unconscious. Like, before you act, like, what are you doing? Like, what's happening? Like, you don't just do it. It's not being driven by your unconscious. And then you have your psychosexual stages of development, your oral, anal, phallic, latent, oral, anal, genital, phallic, latent. Yes. And that was the description of how a child developed throughout the stages of life. So when we think of like a fixation, his idea of fixation is like, let's say you weren't able to pass from like the oral stage to the phallic stage or genital stage. You're fixated at the oral stage, you believe that now you have an oral fixation. The reason why you keep putting things in your mouth is because you have an oral fixation. You weren't able to conquer that piece of development as a child. Some of my biggest things against Freud is a lot of his work was based on case studies, which is good work, but not what provides a heavy level of empirical support. A lot of his patients were very rich people. A lot of his ideas were heteronormative, very sexist, a lot of negativity and demoralization towards women. And a heavier focus on male as more of the supreme being. And he also believed that homosexuality was a mental illness and that it could be cured by trying to have sex with women. So there are some things, that were good with him, but not really all that much. He also came up with like the Oedipus and Electra complex. So an Oedipus complex is when the son is very attracted to the mother, but sees the father as a threat for impeding on that potential relationship. And the Electra complex is just the opposite. The mother is sexually attracted to the father and hates the mother because she is a barrier to having a relationship with him. So he explained a lot of parent-child relationships in that way. It's not always true. I mean, there's a lot of other things that can be involved in someone not liking their parents, besides the sexual aspect of it. But yes, so that's Freud. Oh, so penis envy is he believed that women did not like men because they were envious that they had a penis and they didn't. And castration anxiety is men are afraid that they may lose their penis or their manhood. So, I mean, he never met Lorena Bobbitt, so maybe that. Okay. So some cognitive behavior. I'm more of a cognitive behavioral therapist. I believe our cognitions, our behaviors, and our emotions are all intertwined. So a lot of this grew out of the behaviorism movement, with like Skinner and people like that. So this is looking at observable behavior as the primary unit of analysis. Like, what are people doing? What is happening with that person? And then looking back, like, what brought you to that point? There's also a lot of other behaviors that, sexual or otherwise, that largely represent learned associations. New associations can always be learned. We can always learn something new. We can always link things up together. We can always also assimilate new information or accommodate new information to what we have, or we're assimilating to new things as we move forward. But a lot of these are on observed behaviors and also are recognizing our own behaviors and the behaviors of others. So one of the biggest is our fun person Pavlov. So classical conditioning, we've all learned this with the dog, the bell, the food. So with the neutral stimuli, that is the bell, the no response is the dog. These are learned associations. You pair them, you will have then a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned response. This is a very interesting idea, and it has been shown to be associated with a lot of other things as well, not just food and bowls. But if you think about pairing an unconditioned or a neutral stimulus with a unconditioned stimulus, so the bell with the food, that bell now becomes a conditioned stimuli with a conditioned response. We should not be salivating over a bell. Now, thinking about that association, what in the world of human sexuality and sexual behaviors do you think that could also be associated with? How could it explain some other sort of sexual behaviors or ideas of human sexuality?
Would aphrodisiacs fall under like classical conditioning, or is that just like something we associate in terms of, I don't know, like a societal thing where it's like X object results in arousal?
Actions in arousal, such as psychoanalytic theory, getting aroused. Yes. Okay. So, yes. So this idea of repeated pairing of a neutral stimulus with a stimulus that causes specific behavior can lead to that neutral stimulus to become a cue for that behavior. Seeing lingerie in specific ways can create a sense of arousal, depending on what is being paired with that lingerie. This theory has been thought to describe a lot of have some sort of psychological roots in the establishment of certain sexual behaviors, including fetishes. A lot of these are feet for most people are not super, don't create a lot of arousal. However, through enough conditioning stimuli or conditioning, it can potentially become arousing. So then the next one is our Skinner, so the Skinner box, which is operant condition. So looking at reinforced behaviors, increased frequency, punishing behaviors, decrease. So there's reinforcers, which are just responses from the environment that increase the probability of behavior being repeated. They can be good or bad. Punishers are responses from the environment that decrease the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. So punishment weakens behavior. Reinforcers can increase the probability of a behavior being repeated. However, they can be positive or negative. So a positive reinforcement, think about it this way. A positive reinforcement is more likely to strengthen a behavior because we are providing a consequence an individual finds rewarding when the consequence, think about it this way. So if you have a teacher, like let's say everyone did their homework, I would give you all $5 for doing your homework. The problem is you hate doing your homework. The reward is I just gave you money for it. If you didn't do your homework, you didn't get money. So we're providing a consequence, which is the homework, a reward. If I assign another homework assignment, you're more likely to do that assignment again because you're like, oh, I'm going to get 5 more bucks. That's great. So it's going to strengthen that behavior for future actions. A negative reinforcement is the removal of some unpleasant reinforcer. So if you don't complete your homework, you don't get the 5 bucks. So you will complete that homework to avoid the negative reinforcement, which is, I didn't do it, I didn't get the money, that sucks. That moment of where like, oh, that sucks, is going to motivate me now to do the next assignment because you lost out on something. Punishment is, so punishment is when you provide something negative. So the problem with punishment is that it's kind of like a reinforcement. It can either work by directly, providing an unpleasant stimulus or action, like a spanking with a child if they're bad, although nobody spanks kids anymore because everybody thinks it's a bad thing to do, after a response, or by removing a potentially rewarding stimulus, taking money away from somebody. However, the thing with punishment is that it can actually ignite a lot of anger and frustration within a person. It creates a fear within people. It can, punish behavior is often not forgotten. It's often suppressed. So it could actually be brought up later in life and you might not know it. And it's not really a great way to guide behavior. Reinforcement tells you what to do. Punishment tells you what not to do. So studies have shown that actually positive negative reinforcement is better for behavior than punishments. And we could think about it you could also think about it in ways that relate to sex and sexual behavior, which is pretty easy. A positive reinforcement would be like you had really good sex and it was awesome, so you want to do it again. A negative reinforcement is like you were hoping to have really good sex, but you didn't, so you might not do it the next time. So just to reiterate, when behaviors are reinforced, rewarded or lead to pleasurable consequence, the behavior tends to be repeated. When they're punished, they tend to occur less frequently. And reinforcements are generally more effective than punishments. So social and observational learning theories, I love this stuff. So even though I'm not a social psychologist, but behavioral tendencies acquired through observation and reinforcement. So we often imitate behaviors of others, or we see things happening to others and we're either going to do them or not do them. If anybody has an older sibling and has seen that sibling get punished for doing something, we are less likely to do that behavior because we don't want to be punished. If we see them doing something and getting a reward for it, we're more likely to do that behavior because we saw that someone else did something and got a benefit from it. That can reinforce our behaviors. So, especially with children, let's say like adolescents who are exposed to more, sexually explicit materials and things like that, are more likely to take sexual risk compared to those that have not, because they've seen it happen more often and they're more likely to assume that that is the way that things should happen. And this is also where we can get into talking about the challenge of porn and things like that. I'm also going to get into talking later in the semester about, growing up in a home that was not the most comfortable and never had a lot of there were like a lot of negative attitudes that can also map onto a person's belief about relationships and things like that. Like the Bobo the doll, the experiment, Bandura. So like if you see somebody like a child is more likely to hit a clown if they saw their mother hit the clown. A child is more likely to hug the clown if they saw the mother hug the clown. This is a challenge, and I do a lot of research with adverse childhood experiences, and we see I talk to a lot of people who have engaged in more aggressive behaviors now because they witnessed or experienced more physical aggression in their childhood growing up. So that is their way that they learned to resolve problems, is through aggression. That was their observational learning experience. Again, media can also dictate, or we learn from media about what is correct ways and non-correct ways for sexual experiences and behaviors. Again, before I got on my soapbox about how much I hate a lot of TV shows, because we watch these shows and we think, oh my God, sex is so quick and everyone comes at the same time. Like, no, that's not going to happen. But this is the thing, is that a lot of these limitations are depersonalized. They're very broad. We don't think about a lot of, extraneous variables that can influence what we're seeing and what we're watching. It also doesn't take account the role of biology. So things like that. So social observational it talks a lot about behaviors and why we do behaviors, but it's very depersonalized. It's a lot of, oh, well, I just saw it being done. It's not like what I actually wanted to do. I just saw it being done. So I'm just doing what they're doing. There's a lack of personalization about it, often a lot of limited insight, and not accounting for the role of biology. Okay. So social exchange theory. So when we think about this idea of trade, sex is theorized to be commonly traded resource in a relationship. You can look at it as transactional sex, where like, sex work, you have sex, you make money, that's a thing. Sex trafficking is a thing. A horrible story in Georgia that just came about, but not really met the news headlines, which is super sad. But the commonly traded source is sex. If you think about it, it might not be immediate, like I'm getting money for this, but you could be having sex with somebody and be like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in such a better mood. Like your emotional state is better now because of sex. That was technically trade. So it's very important to think about this idea of value and costs. Like, what is the benefit? What is the cost? And that's why we go into a lot of our comparison level, is how we feel about a given relationship depends upon the outcomes we receive. This comparison level is the standard by which we judge our relationships. We may compare the outcomes we are receiving in our current relationship to those we received in past relationships. I'm going to tell you right now, no one is immune to that. We are always going to compare our current or our futures to our pasts. This is what we do. We're also going to compare our relationships to those that are around us. Oh, well, so-and-so, they have such a great relationship. How come you don't treat me that way? Or, they always go do things. How come we never go out and do things? Like, do you even care about me? Do you even love me? Like, oh my God, like, I can't believe this. Like, why are we even doing this? Like, everyone else could treat me better than you. That's the comparison level. So you're looking at your outcomes that you're receiving from being in this relationship. If the benefits and the cost are not matching, you are not in a relationship that I would call as equal. There's no equilibrium. It's no egalitarian type of relationship. So thinking about, like, are we getting what we think we deserve? And you have to be very logical, rational, and not go into space about what we deserve. Like, oh my God, we dated for 3 months. I should have, all these materialistic items. Not really. you know, you got to think about like you, like how happy are you? Is this a good thing for you? You know, what are the benefits that he gives or they give you, or he, she, they give you? What are the benefits that I give them? So that's always an important thing to think about. We could do this consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously. But one of the things that it does leave out is this idea of, a lot of it is biology, but this also comes into like male-female relationships where biology could actually be a thing where like, I want to be pregnant and we're not getting pregnant and I'm not getting what I want out of this relationship. But does a lot of this lead also to psychological aspects? Does a lot of this is built on our social aspects and we have no idea why we want the things that we want, but we see other people getting the things that we want? So it can leave out a lot, but a lot of this is really important to think about with the basics of being in a balanced relationship. Is this a reciprocal relationship? I provide a lot of, you know, shit for this relationship. I'm getting nothing in return. The motherfucker still left the socks on the floor and I asked him to pick them up 5 times. I'm sorry, that was my argument with everyone that I've ever dated. Is that a lot of people may want something, you know, to go to the point of like, a lot of people may want this idea, these materialistic items for the gram and the stories and, oh my God. But if that's something that makes you happy and it keeps you in that relationship, that's totally fine. That is your whatever you want. Totally up to you. You have to know if that's a you or if that's someone that you saw and you think that should be you. So if your idea of like a happy relationship is, you know, the emotional aspect, that's great. If it's the sexual aspect, that's great. If it's a combination of all these, that's great. But you have to think that this is your relationship, and are you comparing it to a level that is inappropriate and idealistic compared to what is real and attainable? Pretty much that was like my entry to couples therapy all the time. Okay. Oh crap, I'm always running out of time. So the big 5, so our openness, our conscientiousness, our agreeableness, our extroversion, neuroticism. Again, neuroticism is really built around emotion. It's like how emotionally stable or unstable is a person. Extroversion is built around this idea of interacting, self-confidence, and social ability. Agreeableness is per individual that would be described as caring and passionate about others, less about themselves. There's those people that are like generally kind, very, you know, engaging, the what can I help you with kind of person. However, that's a person that's often focused on the others and not the self. Conscientiousness is someone who's very dependable and responsible. They are more likely to plan behavior than act spontaneously. They could be, you know, have more type A tendencies where they're very rigid. And then the openness is individuals who are more likely to explore new routes and desires of life. So that's a thing right there. And I already talked about erotophobia. It's just how we approach sex. So the thing with these is that like they all do associate with how we approach a relationship. Like if we're open to experience, we're more likely to have this is the worst way to put this, so don't hate me for this, but we're more likely to have a more diverse portfolio of people that we have dated. And by portfolio, I mean people we have dated not coming from the same cookie cutter person that we've dated forever because we feel comfortable with. And we're more likely to be spontaneous and more likely to be like, wake up, be like, hey, let's go here today. Like, oh, we never had this plan, but we are going to go do this. The conscientious person is more the person that is very dependable and responsible. You can always count on them, but they're also a little bit more rigid. The agreeableness is the person that is going to be super caring, compassionate of others. However, they are a little less rigid. They're the ones that are probably going to say, well, what would you like for dinner? It doesn't matter to me. You pick. Extroversion is associated with, people being able to be more social and out there with others. They're the people that you could drop in, you go to a party with your partner, you drop them in a room, you don't have to worry about them. They're totally okay. They're fine. They're meeting friends with other people. However, that can also spawn a lot of jealousy from someone who is less extroverted and more introverted. And then with neuroticism is a lot of feelings of insecurity and anxiety. So if you are emotionally stable, so men are more neurotic because they are more emotionally stable, mainly because men are less likely to express emotions compared to women who have been deemed to be less neurotic and less emotionally stable, because they are more likely to express emotions. Okay. Sensation seeking is the tendency to pursue thrilling and risky activities. This includes risky sex. More likely, if you're sensation seeking, you're more likely to be the person that is going beyond missionary positions and monogamous relationships. But you might be trying, like, if you're in a monogamous relationship, you might be trying like new sexual behaviors and activities and things like that. It also can be associated with more casual sexual partners and things like that. So, sociosexuality is one's willingness to have sex without commitment or emotional connection. We're going to talk more about this aspect when we talk about relationships and actual sex in that matter as well. I'm just running out of time, that's why. So evolutionary theory. So based on evolutionary theory, it is thought that sex is just meant for reproduction, and we are attracted to people that we deem as reproductively fit. And there are a lot of biological factors that can be included with that, like wider hips for women is more childbearing. If a person looks like they're, showered, groomed, clean, they probably have a job, health insurance, an apartment, benefits, things like that. So they are more desirable for an individual because they know that there's security in that relationship. Also, the reason why men go after younger women is because they are less likely to have had a baby. They're more likely to be more fertile and more likely to be healthy. Also, within evolutionary theory, it's thought that men should have more children with more women to increase their bloodline. And women are more likely to produce a child with just one man for just the purpose of paternity and also security. So that's why they always say, younger women going after older men is not the craziest thought, but an older man going after younger women, not the craziest thought. An older woman going after a younger man might be more like, oh my God, I can't believe that. It is so crazy, like the Ashton Kutcher Demi Moore moment. I'm like, whatever. But it is. Evolutionary theory is such a double standard. So men are thought to look for partners who are healthy and fertile. Women are thought to look for more reliable partners with resources. And this evolutionary theory has also spawned this whole idea of sexual emotional jealousy, where men are more likely to be sexually jealous because they are less likely to be 100% certain that that child is theirs, because that the female that they were having sex with could be someone else, and they have a child, it could be someone else's child. So men are more likely to be sexually jealous. Women are more likely to be emotionally jealous because they might be going out spending time with other women and providing less focus to her. So that is where a lot of this does come from. Like, he's spreading his resources. Totally. So that is going to be a different thing because I just want to get through this. So I'm going to come back to that. So biopsychosocial. So every theory that we have discussed so far has really had a limitation to a lot of things. There's a biological aspect, which does associate with our social aspect. Sometimes our psychological aspects, not always with our social aspects. Evolutionary theory, it does address a lot of biological, but not a lot of psychological. Social doesn't really identify with a lot of the biological aspects, of a lot of psychological aspects. So the reason the biopsychosocial theory has become one of the predominant theories that we use in research, because it incorporates the biological, the psychological, and the social aspects of life. It's pretty much the whole picture. It's a much more holistic perspective of viewing sex and sexual behavior. It considers the entire person and in all different situations. So sexual health is more than just the absence of a disease or dysfunction. It is definitely the function of the person and the human. So this is the model. So you could see that there's also a feedback loop. A feedback loop means that, let's say that something is happening in my social aspect. So this emphasis on interpersonal relationships and environment could have a negative feedback to my psychology, which is the emphasis of, early childhood experience or my current self-concept. And that'll then feed back to our biological. Same with, if I had a negative event happen in my childhood, I might not engage in that socially. That could affect my potential biology because I'm super stressed about that. And that high levels of stress does affect our biological makeup. Stress is one of the biggest influences about that. I totally ran through a lot of this. We are out of time. I am going to post these, but I can touch on them briefly again on Wednesday to go over it again. Yes, but if anybody has any questions about anything, I'll be here for just like a hot minute, so we could totally chat. But other than that, have a lovely day, and I'll see y'all on Wednesday. Yes.